early in the morning. So keep her in your prayers. We'd appreciate it. I want to also remember those who are mourning loss. Gavin Valley family, and the loss of his mother, and Joe and Karen and the loss of their father, and then as well as the Rutledge family. So please remember all of these in your prayers. Don't know that we have any other announcements. We were considering a field change tonight with singing, because this is our normal singing night, but the high school class is busy with some lads to leaders activities, so we thought it's hard to have singing without the high school group. So we're going to change gears, and Rich will have our class tonight. We'll continue our study in Hebrews, so we'll be in Hebrews chapter 12, I believe. So we'll go ahead and dismiss our young people to their classes. Good group. Thank you, Rich.
So you want to be turning to Hebrews chapter 12. That's where we left off last week. And like Tracy said, we were started one thing and then another thing, and then we're back to this thing. So I have no notes, so I'm going to need some input from some various people. Notice I have two Bibles, because this one I can read, but it's not the version I use. This is the version I use, but I can't read. So we'll see if we can get through. All right, Hebrews chapter 12. If you remember last week, we talked about chapter 11. We talked about the great heroes of faith. And some say that chapter 11 is kind of just kind of stuck in there. You know, he's exhorting them. He's talking about all these things concerning Christ and the better covenant and all that. And then he just sticks chapter 11 in there. But really, it follows very well along with the book itself. He says, you know, he makes 4 or 5 exhortations in the book. In chapter 2, verse 1, he talks about that we got to give more earnest heed to the things that were written, that it is the old law, because they died, and we have a better one now. And he goes on, and he gives several exhortations. Chapter 10 is another one, where he starts talking about considering Jesus and not forsaking the assembly. And so that's another exhortation. And he gets to the end of chapter 11, and he says, don't shrink back. And then he starts 10, and then he starts chapter 11, and he says, let me tell you about some people who did not shrink back. For instance, a prostitute, Rahab. She's listed here. Why would she be listed here? What one thing did she have that he's trying to get across to these people? She had faith. You know, he wasn't condoning when he started doing that. And so she had faith. That's what the whole book of Hebrews is about. Don't shrink back. You're starting to wane, but don't wane. Keep on keeping on, so to speak. And so he goes through that whole chapter 11. And at the end of chapter 11, we kind of finished up real quick. That's why I'm just saying a few comments about it. But notice in verse 39 of chapter 11, it says, all these things through commanded their faith did not receive what was promised. Here's these people with great faith, and they didn't even see it. They didn't even get to see it, and the Hebrew writer is saying, you're seeing it now. You're right here. You get the benefit of the doubt, so don't go back to something that's inferior to what you're doing now. And so I think that was interesting that right at the end of all these great people, he said, and they didn't even see it. And they got more faith than what you got, basically is what he's saying. He's saying, so don't give up, he's saying. Keep that faith. And then as we begin chapter 12, he says, I got to read out of the KJV. I'm just used to it, so we'll see if I can read my small print here. It says, the first couple verses. It says, wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside in every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So here we see this is really just a kind of continuation of chapter 11. You know, he just finishes all that and he says, therefore. What's that mean? That means based on what I just said. Here's why. So based on what I just said, this great cloud of witnesses press on. Are they supposed to be looking at these witnesses? Or are they supposed to be looking at somebody else? It's not a trick question. They're supposed to be getting encouragement from the witnesses, but who are we supposed to look to? The author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus. So he says, basically he's saying, he says, take courage from these people. And as Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, or 2 Corinthians chapter 11, imitate me as I imitate Christ. They're to imitate those people of great faith, but they're to look to Jesus. And because he is the author and perfecter of the faith. And what kind of race are they supposed to run? Patient? What's another word maybe we use instead of patience? Pardon? Endurance, perseverance. And in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul uses something similar to that. He talks about the games, and he says, so fight I is not beating the air. And he said, and let me tell you something else. He said, they all run the race, but who gets the crown? Just one. He says, so run so that you may receive. And that's similar to what he's saying here. He's saying, listen, we need to run this race. We need to look to Jesus and lay aside every weight in the sin. What is the sin he's talking about here? Okay. And it's the lack of what? Faith. Yeah. He says, let us, don't let that get you. He says, we need to consider these witnesses. Therefore, he says, and we need to look to Jesus, and we need to have the faith. We need to lay aside those things and that sin and that lack of faith that we have, and we need to look to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Yes. Okay. Right. And definitely do that. And that's I've heard this verse talking about the sin that does so easily besets us. And it's like somebody says, well, it's a specific sin. Each person has a different one. And I think you can make that generalization that we need to watch if we have a weak point that we need to work on. That definitely is an application there. But I think he's saying here is, and specifically, this is the sin that I'm writing to you about. This is what you need to be encouraged of. You don't have that faith that you need to have, or that you once have, and you're waning. It's waning. And so we need to put out all sin, no matter what it is, from our life, and walk that and run that race. Any other comments? Okay, good comment, good comment. All right, let's look at verses about 3 through 11, verses 3 through 11. I'm going to ask, Roland, can I get you to read that for us? Hebrews chapter 12, verses 3 through 11.
Consider him who endured from sinners such grow worried or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet restrained to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation and address you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, or be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord is disciplined to one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? But they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it.
Okay, so here now, as he's giving this last exhortation, beginning there in the verse 1 of chapter 12. So now he's shifting gears just a bit, and he's going to say, look, God sends the rain on the just and the unjust, and the sunshine and the blessings and everything else in this life that we might see. As a matter of fact, that's, you read history, extra biblical stuff, and we see that what was going on. The quote, the evil people was winning, so to speak. And he's saying, look, don't faint. You're being chastised. If you're being chastised by God, and do not faint when that happens. So once again, I think it's a really good, once again, the Hebrew writer, just perfect. The Bible it's perfect in every way. And here he starts talking about a struggle and chastisement, and he's saying, and then he just brings it home. He's saying, you love your fathers, don't you? If you have a loving father, sometimes he had to tap you on the backside maybe every once in a while, but you still love him. You still respect him. And if that's the case, look to Jesus. Jesus did the same thing. Only God looked away from him, and he still respected his father. And then he brings that home to us as far as the chastisement in verse 7, and not fainting, and our fathers in 9 through 11. And so once again, the Hebrew writer is saying, don't go back. I'm encouraging you. I'm chastising you, if you will, because earlier on in verse 3 and 4, he says, you've not resisted unto blood. So apparently there have been some persecutions. Some people have died, and they were starting to shrink back. And he's saying, don't do that. Don't shrink back. Look to Jesus. He endured the cross. He had a perfect father, and we had fathers who chastise us, but we respect them as well. Any comments?
Well, Rich, here, of course, one of the things, the reason they're starting to have, starting to be looked at and looked upon different. And so it'd be easier for them to fall back the other way instead of keep going. And so here he talks about, of course, father discipline, and he says, Christ is disciplining you now. And it may seem painful for you now, but later on, it's going to be well worth it, which we understand that as far as discipline today. When our parents disciplined us, you know, they were, I can remember my grandfather saying, this hurts me more than you, and I always doubt that. But the fact is that that's what he's saying, is that right now, you've been disciplined, it may look bad, but in the end, it's going to be better. So don't come back. It's going to be worse for them if they turn back. And he, of course, if they were to turn back and to stay on the straight and narrow, so to speak, you're going to suffer persecution. That's the word of it. But now he says, continue on. That's why he said earlier, keep on keeping on and look to Jesus and not this. But I also say this is a good text for disciplining today, even in the church today. Sometimes we have to pull discipline, and we can use this passage here as part of that, because the Lord disciplines his children.
Right, right. And, you know, you at least heard the saying probably was, somebody goes out, a father or mother for that matter, goes to discipline their children, and they say, this is going to hurt me more than what's going to hurt you. Yeah. If you're the one who's getting it, you say, yeah, right. But then you become parents, and you realize what they meant by that. And the idea that it's there, and it's in a loving way if it's done right.
And certainly, Jesus, it was already Jesus that had to discipline them too. And I think that's the point that maybe we don't see him. He wasn't enjoying the discipline. It was hurting him, but he had to do it in order for them to understand.
Right. Revelation, right? The whole book of Revelation. Those people was enduring persecution. And the Apostle John had to write that great letter, you know, and chapters 2 and 3, you know, he told those churches, you're not living up to what you're supposed to be doing, you know. He was chastising them. But then the rest of the book goes on, and you finally see who's really in charge. And that's no different here. You know, he's using argument after argument after argument, saying, you know, we have a better covenant. We have a better mediator. We don't have to go to a priest. We can pray straight to God and through Christ. And so things are much better with us now. Verse 12. Get into verse 12. It says, wherefore lift up the hands which hang down and the feeble knees. That just, to me, it's like he's saying, you know, you need to get with it, so to speak. You know, we remember in the Old Testament, remember Joshua and remember Achan and Ai. He stole that stuff out of Jericho, and they went up, they defeated the people of Jericho, and the walls fell down, and they thought they were invincible. And one of the Israelites stole some stuff from Jericho, which he wasn't supposed to. And they went out against this little town that they outnumbered. I don't remember the exact outnumbering, but they were way outnumbered. The Israelites outnumbered them. And the Israelites lost. And Joshua was praying, and God said, I want you to get up off your knees, and go purge sin out of the camp. And when they had done that, they went against them again, and this time they overwhelmed that little town of Ai. And that reminds me, when I'm reading this, of that. Get up off your knees. You know, get up off your knees and start running the race, as we said there in verses 1 and 2. And lift up your hands to God and depend upon Him and have that faith in Him that we've been talking about. Verses 13 says, beginning at verse 13, it says, and I'm just going to read, I'll go ahead and read to the end of the chapter here, starting at verse 13. It says, and make straight paths for your feet, for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way, but let it rather be healed. Follow peace with all men, holiness without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, troubling you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know that afterwards, when he would have, though he sought it carefully with tears. For ye are not coming to the mount. Let's stop there. Once again, he's saying, he goes back and he gives another illustration. After all these illustrations in chapter 11, he says, now I'm going to tell you somebody who went back. I'm going to tell you somebody who slid back and he never recovered. And that was Esau. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of porridge, basically. And he never got it back. He tried, he cried. Remember the story with him and Isaac? And Isaac said, no. He says, I've already given the birthright. I can't give it to you. And so he gives another example saying, don't shrink back. Remember this person. You know, as it was said earlier, you know, remember Lot's wife. You know, don't look back. The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 3 talks about pressing on, you know. And let me just back up just a little bit. It has to do with this, but do you think the Apostle Paul ever forgot those people that he had stoned, put in prison? Most of those people probably died. Prisons wasn't like they were today. I don't think he did. Matter of fact, in Timothy, chapter 1, 1 Timothy, he said, I'm the chief of sinners. I don't think he really forgot. But in Philippians chapter 3, he said, this I do. He said, I press on towards the goal, the prize of the high calling in Christ Jesus. First Philippians chapter 3, verses 10 and following. He said, that I do. You know, he was pressing on. Did he forget? Probably not. But he couldn't shrink back. He couldn't just keep looking at what was done and not do anything about it. And so he went out and did God's will, and he pressed on the rest of his life. Any comments on this section? All right. That's right. And then in turn, you're probably strengthened just as much as they are. Yeah. And another passage there, I believe it's in chapter 31 of Isaiah, that they'll run, they won't be weary. You know, they'll mount up like eagle wings. So once again, if we put the trust in God, we can do that.
Yeah. Really made me pause. Read verse 16, and ESV it says actually, make sure that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, and you know that if you go back and read that story, there's nothing about sexual immorality mentioned in that, but this writer has some other knowledge, I guess. But puts a whole different idea on you look back at Esau, after the blessing was given, he went and married Canaan and made it into multiple wives and different things like that. So maybe that being talked about here, but that was part of the reason that Rebecca sent Isaac away, saying, "Break line, you go kill me if you go and marry a Canaanite." Right, you said that. That's the next thing that Esau did.
Yeah, and that's and that's a good point. someone has once said, I wish I said this, but it's nothing that I've said. I was just reading about it, but someone once said is the Old Testament is a New Testament concealed, and the Hebrews is the Old Testament revealed. So the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, but Hebrews is the Old Testament revealed. And like Damon was saying, this inspired writer may have had some more information concerning Esau, or the one giving the inspiration obviously did, but that's right. Okay, any other comments? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sometimes we think, and we study more, and I think rightly so, the New Testament, right? We're under the New Covenant. But sometimes you have a hard time understanding some of that if you don't know some stuff about the Old Testament. And I think that's, once again, I think that's why the word in 2 Timothy 2, verse 15, is used diligently. Some translations say, study to show thyself approved. The other one says, give diligence. Well, the study, the idea behind that word is diligence. And so it takes diligence. And I think that's part of this, what this Hebrew writer is saying, look at all these people, they died in chapter 11. They didn't even see it. But look at all the great things they did. Keep on doing that. All right, let's look at starting at verse 18, and we'll read from there. We won't read the whole rest of the chapter, but mostly starting at verse 18. For we are not coming into the mount that might be touched. Once again, the Old Testament reference, and burnt with fire, nor blackness or darkness or tempest. And the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice they heard, entreated that the word should not be spoken to them anymore, for they could not endure that which was commanded. And if as much so a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But ye are coming to the Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly of the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and the God and judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better than that of Abel. And so here I love this. This is one of my favorite passages in the book of Hebrews. As once again, he pulls from the Old Testament, and he talks about when they were there at the mount, and they were all afraid. And they said, Moses, go talk to God. We can't do this. And it says, and then it goes on, it says they couldn't even keep the commandments after that. But they could not endure. And of course, there may be some undertones here saying, well, what happened to them that couldn't endure? After 40 years, there was none of those people left, were there? Only two people that was of age that went into the promised land, right? Remember those two people? Caleb and Joshua. Those are the only two that made it. All those other 603,000 men over the age of 20, they all died in the wilderness in 40 years because...
They said, oh, let me take that land.
Right. And earlier in chapter 11, it mentioned about Joshua and Jericho. So that's right. But I love the verse 22 and 23. He says, but now he's going to contrast it. Verses really 22 through 24. He says, here's how they got the old law. Here's how your lawgiver, Moses, gave you the law. And he had to go up there. Even he was exceedingly scared. And, but he went. But those people couldn't keep it. But verses 22 through 24, he says, but you've come to something better. You come to a heavenly Jerusalem. You come to the church of the firstborn. You come to one who's Jesus, in which Jesus is the head of, who is a mediator, and not just a mediator, but a mediator of a better covenant. So here's that comparison again. Don't go back to the old way, because this way is so much better. And so, once again, encouraging these Hebrew Christians. And let me just say, and I say it a lot. Sometimes we probably really don't know what they were going through. I try to put myself back in the first century and all the customs and all the things that was going on. And of course, we got the whole Revelation here, so it's easy for us to say. But, they were probably having a hard time. And I'm sure that this Hebrew writer, when he wrote to them, I'm sure there was a lot of sincere people in that congregation, whatever congregation it was that he wrote to, that this book went to, there. But God knew through this inspired writer that they needed encouragement and that they were falling back. And it's easy for us 2,000 years ahead to look back and say, oh, yeah, they should have gone on. But then maybe we should put the light on us and say, maybe I should have done this. Maybe I should have went and saw Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. Or maybe I shouldn't have done this, Put the light on us. Because that's ultimately, ultimately what this book is for, right? To study it and to do it. In Micah, Micah said, what does God require of you? And then he says, here's what you need to do. Do justly, have mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And of course, knowing what those things are, how do we know what those things are? We got to study the Word. And then when we study the Word, we can't just be a hearer, right? As James 2 says, but we got to be a doer and go do what it says. So here's that, once again, the connection, the comparison. Here's what happened to the old covenant. The new covenant, somebody was hung on a tree. And I know Roland talked about the crucifixion on Sunday, but just a note, and not to get too gory, but, crucifixion was just the worst kind of death you can imagine. And the Romans really kind of perfected it. They didn't invent it. And some of the things that they did, and sometimes they just crucify somebody in a weird position just for grins, And typically what happened is they'd get beaten, they'd get scourged, they'd be weak, they'd be bloody. And then they would tie them. Sometimes they use nails, sometimes they use rope to a cross. But they weren't way up high. They wanted them to be within about a foot or so of the ground so wild dogs, when they come by, they can gnaw them. It was not a pretty sight. And so he's saying, look, when you went to the mountain and you got the mountain quaked, everybody was afraid. But Jesus Christ died on the cross. He's in a new covenant. And it's so much better than that old covenant you want to go back to. And he is now our mediator. And so that great contrast between the old. Any comments? Okay, let's read the last 4 or 5 verses here, starting in verse 25. It says, see that you refuse not him that speaketh, for if he escaped not whom refused him that spaketh on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake the earth, not only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of these things which are shaken, as the things that are made, those things that which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. So once again, this final exhortation here in chapter 12, and I think it's, once again, he's saying, look, if you refused him that was on earth and you're still alive, you still got a chance. But if you refuse him as in heaven and you die, then there doesn't remain anything, as he said in verse 29, our God is a consuming fire. You know, and that's really made to, I have fear. That makes me fearful, a respectful fearfulness, because God cannot look upon sin. His eyes are too pure, Habakkuk 1 and verse 13. He cannot sin, Hebrews chapter 6, verses 10 and following. So, but he's a consuming fire. But the thing that I wanted to also point out is that he said this world, he said it's going to be taken down. He said, you can't see these things now, but one of these times, everything you see is going to be gone. And the only thing that's going to be left is going to be those things that are not seen. The Apostle Paul, I keep saying Apostle Paul because I think he wrote this book, but very similar language in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. He mentions in verse 4 and 5, actually chapter 5, beginning in 5 and verse 1. But he mentions about we looked at things that are not seen, for the things that are seen are temporal, but the things that are not seen are eternal. And then he says, you know, wherefore, if this earthly house of my tabernacle be dissolved, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And so those are things that are not seen. And so here he's encouraging these Hebrew people that, look, you're going through a rough time. You're going through a tough time. You want to shrink back, but he is so much better now. And if you keep the faith, then one of these times when all this stuff is removed, all these evil people that seem like they've got everything that's in control, then you'll be the one. Matter of fact, we're told that we'll judge angels. And so, once again, the last great encouragement saying, do this, remain faithful. And by the way, our God's a consuming fire. He's a righteous God. He'll reward those. He won't do anything unrighteous, but he's got to punish sin. And when he does, he will do it according to his will, and it will be final.
Very good. The ESV here says, again, shaking, it says, let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and honor. I like that, acceptable worship. Is it acceptable to the Lord?
Yeah.
It also says, give reverence and honor.
And who's the reverence referring to?
Reverence,
Reverence to who?
you're reverencing God.
The only time reverence is used in the Bible in relation to a person. And who's it to? It's not to reverence so-and-so. It's to God himself. The only time it's used in the Bible in referred to a person and is referred to God himself.
He said, with reverence and honor, and then he says, for God.
Yeah.
That, as you said, that should make the hair
Yeah. He's giving them all these encouragement, you know, and showing them how much it's better. And he says, and then every once in a while he says, but remember, you know, but he's trying to encourage them as much as possible without being, you know, that there's a line between positive and negative. You know, what is it? You can catch more bees with honey than vinegar or something like that. So he's really trying, but he's weaving that in so they understand that, hey, look, there's something coming and it's going to be final. And you don't want to be on the bad side of that. Tammy, did you have a comment?
Well, is the thing that cannot be shaken in the church?
Which verse are you at?
Yet once more indicate the little things that are shaken, that is things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain, therefore let us be grateful for his given kingdom that cannot be shaken. Is it not talking about the church?
I think it's talking about the church, but I think it's talking about those things to the come. Yeah, I think it's talking about the church. But it's those things which are not seen, that is our souls, the church, the assembly of the firstborn, as he mentioned back up in verses 22 and 23, that same context. Yeah, I think, and I think he's drawing a comparison which they were doing things which were seen, right? The law of Moses was a very visual law, if you will. Yes, there were things. Yes, it was spiritual. Yes, it had faith. It was given by God, so there wasn't anything wrong with it. But there was a lot of things that you did. Okay, it was a lot of outward stuff. Here, it's more. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, but here, you know, God says, I'm going to write it on their heart. Uh, they're going to have to worship me in spirit and truth. Those unseen things. Yeah, I think in general, referring to the church and the spiritual nature of the church, it would not be shaken. Right, right.
Starting in verse 18, all that. Talk about even the east says yeah, God was down on earth, on down, he was warning, yeah, he's still doing there, hey, let's make it down, what's it? And so we see the idea of acceptable worship, you're talking about God, how to make, you know, the direct reference to that God, they were committing at that point. You know, this is the letter, so they know that, they know what's being talked about. So when God was on earth, he was shaping the place from the side by all. That whole scene was going on there. That way, it's a reminder of history. It's a reminder of what's God.
Right, and that's part of what's going to be shaken, right? That was not going to remain, but however, the church is the firstborn, as they mentioned in verses 22, 23, that's what was going to remain. That was going to remain through the ages, it was going to remain in eternity, and that was the important thing, I think, part of what he was doing. It's like, this is the Mount Zion you came to, and it's so much better than what they came to in the Old Testament. All right, we got about 6 minutes. I think we get through chapter 13, but let's just read a few verses. Next Wednesday, we'll start a new book. So, chapter 13, beginning verse 1. Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some entertain angels unawares. Remember them that are in bonds, bound with them, and them that suffer adversity as being yourselves also in the body. So once again, talking about those entertaining angels, I've always heard this unaware. I've always heard this about, this is Abraham, and this is probably but you look at the Old Testament and what happened. It's kind of mixing of whether Abraham really knew these people were from God or not. But at any rate, it says, we're supposed to be hospitable. We're supposed to help people. Even maybe those people that stand on the corner wanting a handout. That's why we have these bags that we fixed sometimes. I heard somebody say, I can't be a conscience for everybody. I can do what I think is best and give somebody or help somebody out. And if they abuse it, that's not on me. if I think they're going to do the right thing and then they go do something else. But I've done my part. And in regards to this word that we've been talking about, isn't that what the Hebrew writer is saying? He's saying, look, God done his part, and all he wants you to do is do your part. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about these things that's happening now. Just remain faithful, do your part, and the rest will take care of itself, so to speak. Let's see. Verse 4. Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things that you have, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, for that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What shall men do unto me? And so once again, he's kind of sandwiching all this stuff in with even the previous chapter. Remember, these were not chapters as we see them when it was first written. But there in verse 5, let your conversation, good old King James word, somebody else have like manner of life, or what's the other version say? Okay. But that word conversation really means the way of life, the way you live. For a long time, I know I was not a Christian when I graduated high school and went away to college, but they gave me a Bible, and I remember reading that conversation. What are they talking about? You know, I knew that it didn't really mean conversations. We're just standing here talking to one another. I knew it didn't mean that, but I didn't really know what it meant. But later on, I found out. But conversation is a manner of life, the way you live. But he sums it up in verse 6, you know, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What shall men do unto me? So he sandwiches that in with everything he's just talked about. He said, hey, put your trust in the Lord, put your faith in the Lord. And if you do that, then you don't have to worry about what men shall do unto you. Now, that's easier said than done, granted. But that's what he says. He said, if you do that, then everything's going to be right in the long run. Everything's going to be right when you hear those words, enter in, faithful servant. All right, we only got a minute or so left. I'm going to stop right there. Any other closing comments?
Me has always been an important verse, pursuing peace with all men, holiness without which no man will see God. That verse is always very relevant. Dealing with people, first and foremost.
That's right. And what did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. Yeah. Good comment. Good comment. Okay, well, thank you all for listening, for me fumbling through this lesson tonight, since I totally was not ready. We're dismissed.